Hello, welcome to Encyclopædia World Video. This is a series of lectures about the so-called Middle Ages, or medieval period of humankind history. Before we begin with that lecture's topic, we must briefly revise the content of previous lectures, that is, the lectures about the previous period of history, the Ancient Ages, or the so-called Classical Antiquity. As we have said in previous videos, these periods' names and periodization of history were invented by modern historians and chronologists, meaning it is an artificial invention of modern times, designed only for the purpose of easier learning of history and remembering old events from the past. So you all remember the standard periodization of history, accepted by the majority of contemporary historians and scientists. The first two periods, prehistory and ancient ages, were discussed in all the previous videos, both referring to the most distant past of humankind history. The first one, the prehistoric period, or the Stone Age period, is called that way in the mainstream science, though it is not an accurate scientific term, and it would all be better to call it post-Ice Age period, or post-flood period, or simply the most distant past of history. There really is nothing like prehistory, that is a period before humankind history, since it refers to the beginnings of humankind history, the period of the very first humans. The Ancient Ages refers to the period of the first major civilizations, such as Sumer, Egypt, Canaan, India, China, Incas, and so on. Finally, after that period, we come to the Middle Ages period, about which we will be talking from now on. First of all, we must say a few words about Middle Ages timeline and the Middle Ages name meaning. So why is it called Middle Ages? Again, this is only a name given by early modern historians and an artificial periodization of history that is neither itself divided into any period, nor humankind history should be looked at as if certain major changes occurred in humans overnight or the history itself. The early modern historians were those who named the period that way. The most distant past was named the Ancient Ages, or Classical Antiquity. The prehistoric period name was not yet invented. These historians marked the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 as the end of that period. Why did they take this date? Rather from non-historic political reasons, because they were from the countries formerly belonging to the Western Roman Empire. Many historians today consider this event, the fall of the Roman Empire, to have been the turning point of history, claiming it as the reason for taking this exact date. However, although the fall of the Western Roman Empire was a sort of turning point, because the Roman Empire collapsed, it nonetheless refers only to one part of the world, not the whole world. Anyhow, those early modern historians then named the period between ancient ages and their own time the Middle Ages, from obvious reasons. In later times, during the 19th and 20th century, historians named the period after Middle Ages the Early Modern Period, while the Middle Ages period name remained, although it was no more in the middle between their own time and the most distant past of humankind history. The modern historians took the date of fall of the Eastern Roman Empire in 1453 as the end of the Middle Ages period. Why did they take this date? They took it from the same non-historic political reasons. Yes, again, it was a kind of turning point of history, but the real reason is still an unscientific one. Today, historians usually take another date from the 15th century, the date of Christopher Columbus reaching America in 1492, as the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of New Era, or the early modern historic period. You should know that there were many different periodizations of history in the past, proposed by various authors, but according to the most accepted one, the Middle Ages period spans from the year 476 to 1492. On the other hand, these two dates do not represent important dates and turning points in the history of all nations in the world, but only partially in one part of the world. In other words, we cannot designate two exact years or centuries as the beginning and ending dates of the Middle Ages for the whole world. That would not make any sense. But what we can do is to study past by all of the standardized periods as a way to more easily learn about history and remember all the important events. And the period we will learn about at this moment is approximately a time period between the 5th and the 15th century. We may call it the Middle Ages, as early modern historians called it, although it would be best not to give it any name. Why not? Besides the mentioned reasons, the main reasons why we do not have to call it Middle Ages, or in any other way, is the same reason why the name prehistory does not have to be used, or should not be used. It is because it can raise misconceptions about the Middle Age time period, and false ideologies stemming from the ignorance or wrong interpretation about past events. For example, the first associations for Middle Ages for most people are superstition, religious fanaticism, primitivism, ignorance, scientific progress stagnation, technology progress stagnation, and other negative sides modern people attribute to those times. Many people today believe that people who lived in the Middle Ages were less intelligent, more superstitious, and more primitive than them. Indeed, we all imagine the Middle Ages as some distant time period when people knew nothing about hygiene or science, and people who believed in fairy tales and myths about dragons, giants, and demons, fanatically defending their faith in church and God. Furthermore, modern scientists frequently use the term Dark Ages for the Middle Ages period. However, this image about the Middle Ages is not only distorted, but it is entirely false and based on unscientific claims of a few individuals who lived in the 19th century. As we have said before, there were scientists in the 19th century who believed that some people, from unexplained reasons, were more primitive and inferior than other people, more akin to the so-called prehistoric people whom they imagined to have been more primitive, inferior, and less intelligent. This false ideology became the foundation of certain destructive 20th century philosophy and political movements that wreaked havoc all over the planet during the Second World War and afterwards. Now we know that this theory is simply not true, and that neither the so-called Middle Ages people nor any people today are more primitive and inferior than other people. As we said, people in the past were the same as we are today, and there is no difference between any nation in that sense, both of the modern and medieval ages. If you remember, you probably realized all by yourself that this kind of unscientific view on history, that people from the past were allegedly more primitive than people today, was applied to prehistory people as well, that is, to the most distant past of human history. In other words, both prehistory and Middle Ages people were considered to have been more primitive than people living today. It is the same wrong view on history. In essence, the people from the Middle Ages did not differ from modern people at all. In literally every single aspect of life, they were the same as modern people. There is no difference, except that they did not have electricity, for instance, which does not make them inferior to us. Most of the inventions we use today, and most of the knowledge about the world we possess today, should be attributed to people from the most distant past and to the people who lived in Middle Ages. The most common misconception about the Middle Ages is that the church authorities prosecuted people who made scientific discoveries, or the misconception about the flat planet Earth belief. The truth is that people in those times never believed the Earth was flat, nor were the scientists prosecuted because of their discoveries, as some claim. Those were not some dark ages of superstition, ignorance, and wars of religion. The only true thing here is that people in those times did not always apply hygiene principles, as most people do today, though this was only true for crowded cities which had no water and canalization systems built. The generally accepted view of history as a sort of linear progress of humankind in science, technology, and even anatomy, from the so-called primitive people of prehistoric times to modern people, is almost entirely wrong. There were never primitive people, neither in the most distant past nor in the Middle Ages. And there isn't any sort of general progress and improving or evolving of humans. It is not progress in science and technology, it is only an accumulation of knowledge and experience of all humankind. We could compare that process to a maturation and growing process of individual human beings. The most distant past of human history is like a childhood period of a single human. The Middle Ages are like the adolescence period, and the modern age is like an adult period of our lives. Although this comparison is not quite accurate, the point is that we can only speak of knowledge and experience accumulation, not about any kind of progress and evolving of primitive people into more superior modern people. We will say more about this topic at the end of the lectures about the Middle Ages. Having said that, we may now move on to the history of the Middle Ages period, that is, the period from the 5th to the 15th century. We will talk about it in our next video. Thank you for watching Encyclopædia World Video.